And good morning. Welcome to our December 17th Sunday School adult class, going through our no longer age of the patriarchs, moving on from the age of the patriarchs in the in-between time from them, aiming towards the Exodus. So the events of Job, we figure about 1588 BC. The Exodus will be 1446 BC. So we've got 140 some odd years here in this period we're talking about. Moses is born 65 years after Joseph dies. So we're in that countdown to the birth of Moses and seeing the shift in the world from the time of the death of Joseph and the events of Job to the birth of Moses. It's a totally different world in these short 65 years here. So we're going to take a look at some of that. Our theme verse where we're at right now is Exodus 1 verse 7. But the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty so that the land was filled with them. And that's what we're seeing played out. So I had a couple of really cool questions last week that I did some digging into to provide answers for. And so we will explore those here. There we are. So getting some timeline stuff from Egyptologist David Roll. Bible, of course, always our ultimate source and authority trumping all else. So pull this up here. One of the things we discussed, Brother Clay had a question on this, talked about how God gave the parameters of the land to Abraham, told him what they were, and then told him to walk it and be familiar with it. And we talked about that some last week. Well, here's something showing, and this is from Glenn Fritz, the guy who got a PhD in environmental geography that I'd mentioned. This is from his book, The Lost Sea of the Exodus. Basically, people had forgotten about and didn't know about the Gulf of Aqaba coming off the Red Sea until the 1800s. So it's only the most recent couple of hundred years. So that's why it was missed as a candidate for the Red Sea of the Bible, because people didn't even know about it. It wasn't really a place gone to. So, and this is the Gulf of Aqaba right here between the Sinai Peninsula and Saudi Arabia. So here in red is the perimeter that Abraham was told and that he would be walking. So this is roughly 400 miles up, 75 miles across, another 400 miles back, and another 75 miles back across. So 400 plus 400 is 800. 75 plus 75 is 150. So 800 plus 150, this is a perimeter of about 950 miles. Yeah. So he didn't do this in a week. So, so this took some time. But what's very key to this is how when he's coming back down south here from the Euphrates River, he's told about this right here. And we saw this in the commentary found along with the Dead Sea Scrolls, that this was running parallel to the Persian Gulf, which is recognized as the Red Sea back then. In the Greek, and then how down here this tongue was splitting out coming from the Red Sea below it. So they are aware of it back then. Abraham was aware of it back then, and that's given as a boundary. In the Old Testament, you never see the phrase in Hebrew, Red Sea. What you see is the phrase in Hebrew, Yam Suf. Yam means sea, but Suf does not mean red. The word in Hebrew for red is the word that sounds like Adam or Edom. Red clay, red man, that's and all that stuff. Suf from Yam Suf that you see, what got replaced with Red Sea in our English and in the Greek before it. Instead of Red Sea, Yam Suf means sea of boundary or the ending sea. And so that makes sense because it's part of the boundary for the promised land. So that was to address Brother Clay's question about Abram's travels and it probably taking a while and the distance and all that. So another thing we talked about was, I promised that I would add a overlay of the state of Texas on this area to see what we're talking about here. Ta-da! Yeah. So here's Egypt. Here's the Sinai Peninsula. Here's Saudi Arabia. Here's the land of Israel. And there's the state of Texas. State of Texas. Yes. Actually, the song goes, I'm in a New York state of mind, but yeah.
He, what he bought was the promised land. Okay, now that is now today known as.
Depends on who you ask. Depends on who you ask. So-
Well, my thing was, it's not was Jerusalem or whatever.
Yep.
It's still those boundaries.
I'm sorry, put this to me. All right, so Brother Clay is asking a good question about the boundaries today versus what the Lord gave Abraham. Keep in mind what the Lord gave Abraham and promised to him. This is in 1876 BC. So the Lord's people and the sons of Abraham definitely have dibs. And so modern areas, so this is the modern nation of Israel. You've got over here, see this outline here? That's what's today called the West Bank. Yeah, kind of funny because it's on the east of Israel, but it's the West Bank of the Jordan River here. And this little sliver right here is the Gaza Strip. Politically speaking today, neither the West Bank nor the Gaza Strip are considered part of the political nation of Israel today. So basically you've got PLO folks in the West Bank, which includes Bethlehem. And then over in Gaza, you've got Hamas. They elected Hamas to be in their government. And then if you've heard of Hezbollah, they're from Lebanon up here in the north. So there's the state of Texas showing us size-wise. But as we saw from over here, all of that is promised to Abraham and the Jewish people descending from him. So does that kind of help some perspective on some things? In fact, we've even got a little zoom in. Warm that up a sec. If you're familiar with some of the cities of Texas, wait for it. Here we go. There we go. So here's El Paso, here's Presidio, there's Midland, and there's Lubbock. So the distance from El Paso to Presidio is going down the Sinai Peninsula there. And then again, here's Saudi Arabia. So there's kind of a zoom in. So when they come from Egypt and come across here, that's they come down here, they come around to the backside to Mount Sinai. That's the area we're talking about, just that area of Texas for a perspective. Now, another question was asked. Sister Diana asked for a Great Lakes comparison. So let's go to the Great Lakes. Yeah, we're not going to worry about you right now, dude. So we take a big zoom out over to the Great Lakes here. Here are the Great Lakes. See if you get the labels to come up. So 5 major Great Lakes here. Lake Superior has a surface area of 31,700 square miles. Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world by surface area. It is the 3rd largest by volume. It holds 10% of the world's surface fresh water. So that's Lake Superior, 31,700 square miles. Lake Michigan, 22,404 square miles, a little smaller. Lake Huron, 23,007 square miles. It's a little bigger than Michigan, not as big as Superior. Zoom in here. Lake Erie, 9,910 square miles, so a bit smaller. And finally, Lake Ontario is 7,323 square miles. So 31,700 square miles, 22,404 square miles, 23,007 square miles, 9,910, and 7,323. So those are the square mileages of the Great Lakes. So how does that compare with the Gulf of Aqaba for the Red Sea crossing that I am presenting? This Gulf of Aqaba here, while the Great Lakes are 31,000, 22,000, 23,000, 9,000, and 7,000 square miles, Gulf of Aqaba, 92 square miles. So much, 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 much smaller. So with that, so bringing us as kind of a review, recap to where we have arrived for this morning. Going through the timeline and seeing the changes that take place here. Let me get to right here. So again, with these moving on from Job, we have in China, Emperor Taigeng of the Shang dynasty. In Egypt, so much Kare of the 13th dynasty, and Manasseh is his vizier with the Egyptian name of Renseneb. Assyria, Arisa II is king, and Isin, Dami-Kilishu is king, and Larsa, Rimsin is king. Babylon has king Sin, Byblos has king Yakin-El. So at the time we were leaving Job, the events of Job, Levi 117, and in the line of Judah, line of Christ, Judah's son Perez, 86, Hezron, his son, 73, and his son Ram, about 15. Okay, so talked about while the Lord's people are here in Egypt, that from up here, further north, we got people from this area coming into the promised land and building the cities that Joshua and his people will later have to deal with. Well, we saw how some of the folks came from this area in Torah. Let me see. Thinking about it, let's try to refresh here. There we go. And how they were referred to as giants or men of great stature in the Greek legends, which kind of fits the Bible. The Bible also talks about these folks being the Rephaim who come down. And as I settle in here, some of these folks become known as the Anakim. Let's try a cheat here. There we are. And we should be back in business. There we go. Okay. So this place here at Victoria, as I mentioned, let's zoom in. Let's see. Remember, we were seeing the pictures of where these folks came from. Remember all that stuff? And so this is over time as the society there developed, but that's kind of the culture that's coming down here. There's another area right here. God bless you. Yes, this is today's turkey, which is not yesterday's roast beef. Okay, so here are some shots again from this area. For some reason, they start with a lot of waterfall shots. But this is the area and the culture that the folks who become the leaders of the promised land while the Israelites are in Egypt, this is what they are coming from. Of course, this is some more modern stuff built on the area. But that was kind of a cool shot. And so we get the idea here for these folks coming off the area of Asia Minor, modern Turkey, that would come down to settle the promised land over there. while the Lord's people are continuing their growth. In fact, let's do this. Resume, resume, resume. Wait for it. Yeah, still having some delays here. Let's try this one more time. They did just recently do an update on Google Earth. And you know how sometimes updates don't always make things better? Yeah, I've experienced that. Okay, now we're looking better. Yeah. So we talked about the growth of the Israelites. Here is a computer-generated recreation of the housing in the area of Avaris, where the Lord's people are living in the land of Goshen. The brown houses here are the Israelites. The white houses over here are the Egyptians. You see the ratio? Yeah. So this is a reconstruction of the Western Asiatic settlement of Avaris. They're called Asiatics, coming from the continent of Asia over here. So the Egyptian quarter again is here in white on the riverbank. That's where the palace and temple are located. And the delta is extremely flat. There are no areas of rock for stone masonry. So everything apart from stone that's brought from further south up, everything else is made of mud brick. And that was very, very common for these things. So in 1586, Egypt gets a new pharaoh named Nedjem something, Ibre, it's blocked out or missing in the writings that we have. And that's 60 years now before the birth of Moses. We've mentioned a guy named Sin-muballit, who becomes the new king of Babylon, father of Hammurabi. And check this out. See how this is bigger than that? That is the envelope for that. Yeah. I don't know how you lick a stamp and attach it and all that stuff, but anyway, this is, yeah. So the clay tablet and the sealed clay envelope that it would go inside. And this is from the time of Sin-muballit. And he was the first one to truly call himself king of Babylon and started extending his empire. 1582 BC, Pharaoh Sobekhotepre, known as Sobekhotep I. This is the guy whose wife's brother is married to Joseph's daughter. So his sister-in-law, through his wife, is Joseph's daughter. And there's some thought that that's how this guy got to be Pharaoh, was his connection to the family and all that stuff. Yeah, now what you know, but who you know, right? Because this guy has no blood connection to the prior dynasties. So this is Sobekhotep the first, Sobek referring to crocodile, Hotep meaning is at peace, things like that. So this is all from that time frame of his. So that's this guy. Next up, we have new king in Assyria in 1581, Shamsi-Adad. And here's a drawing of the royal seal. And I like seeing different cultures and their different ways of expressing things. So Assyria is up here. We'll talk about Mari in a bit. There's Babylon. Of course, the Lord's people are over here. There's Byblos right there. All those folks will come around a bit later. See, Babylon expands. So that's guy Shamsi-Adad. And he actually moved the capital of Assyria up further north to this place, Tel Levan.
Nancy Pelosi and Gavin Newsom
As far as
being related through marriage.
Yes, all that stuff. So the city again that he built over here expanded to about 220 acres, population of about 20,000. So Assyria is kind of up and coming. Next in Egypt in 1580 BC, we have the vizier Renseneb becomes the pharaoh Renseneb. Of course, that's his Egyptian name. We know him by his Israelite name, Manasseh, son of Joseph. becomes Pharaoh at 90 years old and lasts for all of 4 months. His younger brother Ephraim, Emir in Egypt, he becomes his vizier. So pretty cool that Joseph's son Manasseh, one of the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel, actually got to be Pharaoh for a little bit. So here we are, 1580 BC. So now Levi is about 125, Perez 94, his son Hezron 81, Ram about 23. Now this brings us to the new Pharaoh who replaced him, named Hor. And I mentioned the wooden statue that they found of him last week. Here it is. And I guess he was really popular at the football games.
I posted that one in the, just a few, books ago, back to big ears
Yes.
of the, Pharaoh.
Yeah, and you see that here too. So is that their attempt? Now that started, as we saw in the time of Joseph, with Senuseret III and his son Amenemhat III, who was the main pharaoh of Genesis with the time of Joseph. That this was a change in their 12th dynasty to where it was a sign that they were listening to the cries of their people as they were dealing with the famine and trying to plan for that and all that stuff. And it seems that that became a politically expedient thing to do. Hey, we hear you people. And so we'll have the big ears and yeah. So good observation.
The 5 years and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, we'll leave that to interpretation. Let's see, it's a lid of a jar from his time frame. Drawing some different staffs. There's his burial and et cetera, et cetera. So that's this guy Hor. So that statue, let me pull that up again. Talk about this real quick. This is mostly what he's known for. That's life size. It was found in his tomb. His tomb was actually attached to Amenemhat III's pyramid. It was originally made for one of his family, Amenemhat's family, but then they just took it and made it for this guy, enlarged it. So it had been actually ransacked back in the earlier days, but this was still there. This is actually one of the most frequently reproduced examples of ancient Egyptian art. And this is now in the Egyptian Museum, one of the best preserved and most accomplished wooden statues to survive. Again, this is from 1580 BC and it's wood. So what do we have from this guy? So what we found in the tomb, it had his partly gold-covered, gilded, rotten wooden coffin, his wooden funerary mask, eyes of stone set in bronze, but they've been stripped of the gold gilding, but still had the king's skull inside of it. They had these things with their embalming process and mummification process called canopic boxes, basically where they put their organs inside. And so they found his canopic boxes and the containers within them. The mummy of the king was ransacked for its jewelry. Only his skeleton was left in his coffin, which is again is a pretty interesting thing because with the tomb of Joseph, there's no skeleton. Grave robbers don't take skeletons. But we know something that the Bible says about the bones of Joseph, don't we? Yeah. But here's a perfect example where the skeleton is left because it's of no value to grave robbers. King was determined to have been in his 40s at the time he died. So there were some other small statues found, different vases and jewelry and different things. Lots of it had been broken. And so we are now in 1576 BC, 50 years before the birth of Moses, counting on down. We get a new pharaoh in Egypt, they're sure not lasting long. In 1574, again, this 13th dynasty is a time of somewhat weakness for Egypt and the pharaohs until things start to cause them to rise up. 1574, we got Sedjef kare, not much to see there from him. And not much else known about him. We have, same year, about 1574, I mentioned Levi. Of course, we know Levites come from Levi, the priests. He had 3 sons, Gershom, Kohath, and Merari. Moses and his siblings come from Kohath. And so the 3 different lines, Gershom, Kohath, and Merari, at the time of the tabernacle, each of those lines has different duties and responsibilities towards the tabernacle. And so we're given their genealogy. So probably about this time, in that line of Levi's son Gershom, Jahath, about 48 years old, fathers Shimei. So that's about the age they are as they're having their generations down. Brings us to 1573 BC. The guy over in Babylon, Sin-muballit, his 13th year, he fights off the army of Larsa that's attacking him, and they're in a constant conflict. Read a verse from 1 Chronicles 6:38 in an earlier class, where in the line of Levi and the line of Kohath, we have Levi's grandson Izhar born. Now, Izhar is Moses's uncle because he's the brother of Amram, his dad, Amram. Amram is the son of Kohath. Izhar is the son of Kohath. So this is Moses's uncle through his dad. And it looks like Kohath had him older in his life, in his 90s, possibly 97 when he fathered him. Yeah, so this line was having kids much fewer often, a shorter line of descendants here. 1572, counting on down. Believe it or not, we've got another new pharaoh in Egypt. Sobekhotep II. And that's from his time frame. We then get in 1570 a new guy in Byblos over there on the coast of the Mediterranean there in Lebanon, what would be later, earlier days, Phoenicia. Yantin-Ammu is his name. Again, I want to touch on the connection between the Mediterranean places like this and Egypt and their interaction. So Yantin-Ammu, these folks from Byblos, they had names that were very similar to the names down in Canaan and had connections with Egypt. They even had people in government with Egyptian titles. The Egyptian word for governor, the Egyptian word for mayor were the titles that they had in their area. And they would actually use Egyptian hieroglyphs on their items. They used those scarab seals. They even put this is called the cartouche, when you have the name of a pharaoh in this thing, especially right there. Well, they would even use cartouches for there. So they were very influenced by Egypt here. We see these connections. So remember mentioning the Isin dynasty, Larsa, Isin, all those folks in the Persian Gulf and all that? Well, about 1570, 1569, bye-bye Isin dynasty. Their city gets captured by Sin-muballit in Babylon, his 16th year. So in his 17th year, he goes and takes possession of the city of Isin, and he keeps expanding the nation of Babylon here. Guess who gets a new pharaoh in 1568 BC? You guessed it, Egypt. This guy, Kjendjer. He actually, as I mentioned, I think last week, gets a pyramid. And there's the top of the pyramid there. And here's what the pyramid would have looked like if you were able to see it today. However, it does not look like that today. Y'all see it right there?
Yeah.
Neither do I. And for some reason, we have a picture of a guy cooking over there, but yeah. So he had a small pyramid over here in Saqqara. So his capital was probably in Memphis in Egypt. Pyramid was part of that larger complex we saw. It originally stood about 121 feet high, but now it's completely ruined. That top there that we saw was discovered in 1929. It's probably finished while he was still alive. The only pyramid that we know of that was completed during this 13th dynasty. Here it is in ruins, partly due to the damage done when they were excavating it. What is left there only stands about a meter above ground. Limestone casing was removed, stone robbers, all those types of things happening. The core didn't do very well. And so, yeah, all those things going on. So let's see, they had in their construction of it though, they had a quartzite block estimated to be 150 tons. So yeah, that's kind of big. So, and the way they had some physics worked out with the putting of these things in place, they had two quartzite beams that were 60 tons each, forming the roof. And then they had the system set up where things would be set in place and then things would be moved and slid and then sand would fill in and all sorts of crazy stuff there in their engineering. 1568 BC, we have in the line of Joseph to Joshua. Tahan, about 20 years old, fathers Laadan. Okay, cool. This brings us to where we left off last week. So now this refresh catches us up now that we're able to see some of this stuff. We left off with the death of Levi, 137 years old, according to Exodus 6, chapter 6, verse 16. So when Levi dies, his nephew Perez, son of Judah, 106 years old. His son Hezron would be about 93. His son Ram would be about 35. But check this out. Let's talk about Levi probably being the last of the 12 sons to pass from this earth and the loss of this generation and the change that comes with that. So let's see here. So here's a recreation. There's the tomb of Joseph. And amazingly, on this land here, on this property, we have 12 tombs. Imagine that. Here is the layout of the shared tomb of Levi and Simeon. They are buried at different times, so you have different animal sacrifices outside their tombs. And remember that signet ring. Let's talk about this for a moment. Mention how that was on one of Joseph's brothers, and it referred back to Joseph. So what we have here. Let me go back one. Yeah. So the northern chamber held the burial of Simeon, and the southern chamber the burial of Levi. Simeon was put in charge of the mining expeditions down in the Sinai Peninsula, put in charge of that by his brother Joseph. And this ring seal right here is Simeon's stamp of authority as overseer of the mining expeditions. Yeah. Simeon and Levi were full brothers of Jacob and his wife Leah. This amethyst scarab signet ring belonged to Simeon. His Egyptian name was Sobekhotepre, they call him. So let's take a look at those tombs here. And here we actually have them mapped out and identified. So let's see here. This is a speculative, some guesswork here, identifying the tombs of his sons. Simeon was traditionally the third to be buried, likely the first one to occupy the double tomb. We also know Levi lived long. Levi was probably the 11th son to be buried, with Benjamin being the baby. So it seems to have happened here on this property. The cemetery of Joseph's brothers began with Zebulon in tomb number 2, right there. And then, because right here was a pool. And the initial line of the tombs were then dug south of the pool. It was only after the pool was demolished and filled in that then these other tombs were added. So therefore, these are probably the last ones. So we've got number 9, Judah, 10, Naphtali, 12, we've got Benjamin, 2, Zebulun, 3, Simeon, 11, Levi in that joint tomb there. 4, we got Reuben, 5, we got Dan, 6, Issachar, and 7, Asshur. And the pyramid tomb a little further south is Joseph, and then Ephraim over there. So we also saw the animal sacrifices, again, that were made at different times because they died at different times. And right here, these bronze weapons were found in the tomb of of Simeon and Levi. The blades are ribbed, and this one here actually has a handle and pommel made of ivory with gold rivets, bronze filigree work. So these are high status weapons for tribal chieftains, as they were chiefs of their individual tribes. And Simeon and Levi were also known for their violent act when it came to revenge at the town of Shechem for what happened to their sister Dinah. So somewhat fitting that we find daggers buried with them in their tomb here. So that is a good place to pause for today. Yes, Sister Diana.
Simeon was the one who was left hostage
Yes,
Egypt, but he was probably very well treated.
yes,
You know, I'm sure it was a house arrest of the best sort. I get it. You know, when his father refused to trade Benjamin for free Benjamin,
yep,
Simeon was left there.
yeah. And so Simeon was entrusted by Joseph with overseeing the mining work on the Sinai Peninsula. So, yeah. Yeah, no hard feelings. In fact, Joseph kept telling him, guys, don't get too hung up on this. Don't try to excuse yourselves. Don't worry about what dad's going to say, what I'm going to do with all my power. Look, you've intent this for harm against me, but God planned it for good. So God was bringing about a great deliverance. But that's what matters here is the work of God. He's bigger than my good or your bad. This is about God and his work for all of our people. So let's put this to good work and good attitude and good use here. And Joseph was very effective in that, with both his relationships with his family healing and with his relationships with the Egyptians, which we see, as the Bible tells us, imagine that, after the death of Joseph and his brothers, come along folks who don't think back so fondly on them as those who lived through those times. Funny how that works. Generations come up who don't live through what the prior generations lived through, and they don't have that same perspective. They don't have that same appreciation. And that's exactly what we see taking place. So we will pick up next week with moving on from the death of the last of Joseph's brothers and on from there into the changes in Egypt getting ready. We're between 40 and 50 years now before the birth of Moses, so we're almost there. Any other questions, observations, thoughts, or comments on this time of transition? Again, a lot of names and dates. Don't worry about any of that. Just showing as time is moving forward, all the stuff is shifting, getting ready for God's next big thing. All good? Cool. We will stop our share here, stop our recording, and get ready to go before the Lord in song.